My daughter sent me to a hotel for her in-laws, to stay in my own room. 12 hours later, everything collapsed. The afternoon, before my daughter's in-laws arrived, I was folding laundry at the edge of my bed when Claire stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, her mouth already tightened like she had practiced the moment. She did not say hello. She did not sit. She said, "Mom, pack your things." The sentence landed without emotion, like a receipt being read aloud. I looked up at her, still holding one of her son's socks, and I asked, quietly and honestly, "Where am I supposed to sleep?" She exhaled through her nose as if I had asked something selfish. "A hotel," she said. "My in-laws are coming. I am not making them sleep on a sofa. You understand, right?" I tried to speak again, but Benjamin's voice slid in first, smooth and sharp at the same time. "You being here just makes things awkward," he said. "You do not really contribute anymore." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His mother, Evelyn, had already walked past me into my room, opening drawers with 2 fingers as if checking produce. "This room is small," she said, glancing at the walls, "but at least it is quiet. I cannot tolerate that old smell." Richard laughed softly, the way men do when they want to agree without appearing cruel. "At her age," he said, "people should know when to make space." I stood there, a guest in my own room, and realized no one was waiting for me to answer. Claire had been preparing for this longer than I understood. I had heard Tanya's voice through the phone more times than I could count, whispering poison dressed as advice. "Your mom still lives with you?" Tanya had said once, loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. "That sounds so dependent." Another time. "Benjamin's family is on a different level. You need to clean things up before they arrive." Claire never defended me. She laughed nervously and said she was trying her best. Benjamin did not like me because I saw him clearly. He did not hate me for being old. He hated me because I remembered things he needed forgotten and numbers he needed blurred. I had kept books my entire life, first for my husband's small construction business and later for neighbors who trusted my eye. When Benjamin talked about numbers, they did not line up. When he talked about success, it felt rehearsed. I never praised him the way he wanted, never nodded along. I asked questions. I remembered figures. And this house, the one he now walked through like a stage, had been paid for, with years of careful planning, overtime shifts, and the quiet discipline my husband and I shared. I believed, foolishly, that it would hold our family together. As I stood there listening to them decide my place, I felt something give way inside me, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a clarity that frightened me. I saw how easily I had become an inconvenience, how quickly motherhood turned into clutter. About 200 words into this moment, when my hands began to shake and I realized I was being erased while standing upright. I want to pause just long enough to say this to you, listening now. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button and let stories like this keep breathing. Let them echo far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. Because what happened next did not happen by accident. Claire dropped the hotel keys into my palm without looking at me. The metal was cold, heavier than it should have been. "It is just for a night," she said, already turning away. "Do not make a scene." I went to the closet and pulled out my old suitcase, the one with the broken zipper I kept because it still worked if you were patient. I packed slowly, choosing things that did not wrinkle, things that made no noise. Benjamin leaned against the door frame as I passed him. "Check out on time," he said. "Do not embarrass my family." I walked out of the room that once held my marriage, my grief, and my hope, holding a suitcase like proof that I could still leave on my own feet. The hotel room smelled like bleach and old carpet, the kind of clean that tries too hard to erase what came before. And when I set my suitcase down, my hands shook so badly I had to sit on the edge of the bed to steady myself. The television buzzed with static before I turned it off, and the silence that followed felt louder than any argument. I held my hands out in front of me and stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. These same hands that once cradled Claire when she was small and feverish, that signed mortgage papers without fear, that counted grocery money twice, to make sure nothing was wasted. I had trusted these hands to build a life, and now they trembled over a motel bedspread. I pressed my palms together and felt the heat of my own skin, reminding myself that I was still here. When my husband died, people told me I would remarry, that I should not be alone, but I did not want another man's name or another man's habits. I wanted stability, something solid that Claire could return to when the world disappointed her, and that became the house. I did not complain. I did not dramatize my grief. I kept my head down and made sure the bills were paid. When Claire married Benjamin and said they were saving for a place of their own, I opened my door because no one needed a yard and because I believed family meant sharing space without keeping score. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was love. I noticed the numbers long before I noticed the cruelty. Contracts that were too polished, materials billed at prices that shifted without explanation, expenses labeled as client dinners that happened too often to be coincidence. I had spent my life balancing columns, and imbalance has a sound if you know how to listen. I asked questions gently, the way a mother does when she does not want to bruise pride. Benjamin smiled and talked faster, and Claire asked me later why I was always so suspicious. I learned to keep my thoughts folded away, because I was afraid that if I pushed, Claire would push back, and if she pushed back, the marriage might crack, and if the marriage cracked, Noah would pay for it. So I swallowed words that burned. I told myself endurance was a form of strength. What I did not understand then was that silence can turn into permission. Claire began to see me not as support but as weight, something she carried because she had always carried it. Every time she looked at me, she saw the childhood she wanted to outgrow, the years after her father died when money was counted and trips were postponed. She saw how much I had done and how little she felt she had earned on her own, and instead of gratitude, that debt made her angry. Benjamin fed that anger carefully, never loudly. He would say things like, "Your mom always makes you feel like you owe her," or "We will never be our own family if she is always here watching." And Claire would nod, relieved to hear her resentment named as reason. I was not just poor to them. I was proof of something they wanted to forget. Sitting there in that room, I realized how often I had chosen quiet because I believed it was kinder. I had believed that love meant absorbing damage so others could remain intact. But kindness that requires you to disappear is not kindness at all. It is erasure dressed up as sacrifice. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about all the times I had laughed off comments, all the dinners where I cleared plates before being asked, all the small ways I had shrunk to make their lives smoother. Around midnight, my phone buzzed on the nightstand, the sound sharp enough to make me jump. It was a message from Claire. "Come back early tomorrow," it read. "Do not hang around the house. They will be uncomfortable." I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for something softer to appear between the lines, some hint that she missed me or worried about me. But there was nothing, just instruction. I whispered to the empty room, "I am her mother." And the words sounded strange, like a language I had almost forgotten how to speak. The first 2 hours after midnight passed without mercy, my body doing what it had always done when it thought it was safe to finally break. I cried into the pillow without sound, not because I was brave, but because I had learned how to make grief efficient. Then the crying stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving behind a numbness that felt almost useful. I went into the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror the way I used to before difficult meetings, steady and unsentimental. I sat back down on the bed and told myself that whatever happened next would be faced awake. By the third hour, I opened my suitcase, not to unpack clothes but to reach the thin folder I always carried with me, the one Claire used to tease me about, saying I lived like a traveling file cabinet. Old habits die slowly, especially when they once kept you alive. Inside were folded letters, bank notices, and copies of documents I never threw away because I did not trust memory alone. One envelope caught my eye immediately, a letter from the bank dated weeks earlier that I had set aside to review and then buried under daily routines. It mentioned a forthcoming reassessment of a personal guarantee, written in polite language that hid its weight. I unfolded the photocopy of the guarantee itself, my own signature clear and steady on the page, signed years ago when Benjamin had looked at me with gratitude and said, "Just until we get on our feet." I realized how close that reassessment date was, how much depended on my silence. Hours 5 and 6 arrived with the gray light of early morning creeping around the edges of the curtains. I sat on the bed and called Darlene, my neighbor for over 20 years, the woman who had brought soup when my husband died and never once asked when I planned to move on. My voice shook when I finally said it aloud. They put me out of my own room, I told her. They sent me here so his parents could sleep in my bed. There was a pause on the line, not because she doubted me, but because she was choosing words carefully. Ash, she said, firm and warm at the same time, you are not trash, and anyone who treats you like it is telling you exactly who they are. I felt something inside me straighten at that sentence, like a spine remembering its job. By the 7th hour, I was dressed and sitting at the small desk by the window, phone in hand, rehearsing what I needed to say. I called Mr. Whitaker at the bank, the same man who had handled our mortgage years ago and had shaken my hand with respect because he knew I understood numbers. He recognized my voice immediately. I asked him, calmly, what would happen if I withdrew my personal guarantee. He did not dramatize his answer. He explained that it would trigger a comprehensive review, that credit lines could be frozen pending verification, that it would not collapse a business overnight, but would expose any weakness already present. I thanked him and ended the call, my heart beating steadily now, not fast, not slow. This was not revenge. This was cause and effect. At the 9th hour, I called attorney Marcia Klein, the woman who had handled my husband's estate and who had once told me I was too forgiving for my own protection. She listened as I explained what had happened, her silence filled with understanding rather than shock. Are you ready to stop shielding them? She asked. The question was not legal. It was moral. I thought of Claire's message, of being instructed not to exist in my own home. Yes, I said, I am. The last 3 hours were not dramatic. They were methodical. I spread papers across the bed, old emails Benjamin had asked me to keep, receipts he said might be needed later, invoices that never quite matched deliveries. Nothing was stolen, nothing was altered. These were things I had been trusted with because I was invisible, because no one believed an old woman would ever use what she knew. I organized them into neat stacks, the way I always had, each document a small truth that had been waiting patiently. When everything was ready, I signed the request to withdraw my guarantee. My hand trembled for a moment, not from fear but from the weight of finality, and then it steadied. I felt no rush of triumph, only a quiet clarity. They were sleeping in my bed while I woke up. Morning arrived without ceremony, and by the time the sun reached the thin curtains of the hotel room, my phone was already in my hand. Mr. Whitaker called just after 8, his voice careful, professional, the way it gets when consequences are no longer hypothetical. He told me the request had been logged, that the review process would begin immediately, and that Benjamin would be notified. I did not interrupt him. When he finished, I said only, "Then it is time." I hung up before he could soften it, because I did not need comfort. I needed accuracy. I dressed slowly, choosing calm over speed, and watched my phone light up with a message from Claire. "Are you back yet?" she wrote. "Do not make noise. Please." There was no apology, no question about how I slept, only instruction wrapped in politeness. I did not reply. I let the silence stretch, not to punish her, but because I was no longer obligated to manage her comfort. That quiet space, the unanswered message, was the first boundary I had drawn in years, and it felt unfamiliar but right. At the house, everything looked peaceful from the outside. Curtains were open. Cars were parked neatly. I imagined Evelyn sipping coffee at my table, imagined Richard reading the paper in my chair. Inside, however, the system had already begun to shift. A credit line marked "Hold for Review" may sound small to people who have never relied on one, but to a business built on timing and cash flow, it is a held breath that does not release. A payment scheduled to clear that morning did not. An invoice that Benjamin expected to disappear remained stubbornly present. These were not punishments. They were questions. Benjamin felt it before he understood it. He always did. His confidence relied on momentum, on things moving fast enough that no one looked too closely. When the call came from accounting, he snapped at them. When the second call came, he blamed the bank. By the third, His voice found Claire. "Can you keep your mother under control?" he hissed, not caring who heard. "If she messes this up, everything falls apart." Claire tried to calm him, tried to explain that I was not even there. But panic does not listen to reason, and Benjamin's anger needed a target. I arrived quietly, my suitcase still in the trunk of Darlene's car, and stepped into the living room just as Benjamin's phone rang again. This time, he did not smile when he answered. He stepped away, lowering his voice, but there was no hiding the words that followed. "We need additional documentation," the voice on the other end said, loud enough for Evelyn to hear. "Effective today." Benjamin's face drained of color, his mouth opening as if he had forgotten how to speak. Evelyn looked at him, then at me, confusion turning sharp as recognition. She had thought I would stay out of sight. I did not gloat. I did not raise my voice. I stood there, hands folded, watching the consequences of decisions unfold at their natural pace. Richard cleared his throat and asked what was going on, his tone less amused than the day before. Claire looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing me for the first time without the filter of embarrassment. "What did you do?" she whispered. I answered honestly. "I stopped holding things together," I said. "That is all." The room filled with a different kind of silence. Not the kind that erases, but the kind that reveals. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her posture stiffening as she recalculated. Benjamin ended the call and stared at the floor, already running numbers in his head, already understanding how thin the margin had been. No one accused me of lying. No one asked for proof. They all knew, in their own way, that this house had been standing on borrowed balance. I did not feel triumph as I watched them struggle to regain footing. I felt something steadier, something closer to relief. For years, I had believed that keeping the peace required me to absorb every shock. That morning taught me otherwise. I had not pushed them. I had simply stepped aside. I did not learn how to read numbers from Benjamin. I learned it from survival. Before my husband ever owned his small construction company, I kept the books because we could not afford mistakes. Every receipt mattered. Every decimal told a story. When he trusted me with the ledgers, he said it was because I remembered what money felt like when there was not enough of it. I taught Claire the same way, at the kitchen table, showing her how to balance a checkbook before she was old enough to drive, telling her that money was not power but responsibility. When Benjamin first came around, polite and eager, I recognized the signs early, not of crime, but of comfort with bending edges. Numbers rounded where they should not. Timelines shifted to look cleaner. I noticed because I had spent a lifetime noticing. At first, I corrected him gently. I asked where receipts were. I asked why a supplier charged one amount last month and another this month for the same material. Benjamin smiled, thanked me, and changed the subject. Later, he stopped smiling. He told Claire I was anxious, that I worried too much, that I did not understand how modern businesses worked. Claire believed him because believing him was easier than believing her mother was right again. So I stepped back. I told myself it was not my business. I told myself love meant restraint. I told myself I would rather be quiet than be the reason my daughter's marriage cracked. When I spoke to Marcia again, after the bank calls and the long night of sorting papers, she did not rush me. She asked questions the way she always had, careful and exact. I told her what I had kept and why. I told her I had not searched for anything new, had not taken a single document that was not already in my possession. "You understand," she said slowly, "that once you stop protecting them, this may burn everything down." I thought of the way Claire had dropped the hotel keys into my hand. I thought of being told not to exist in my own home. "I am not burning anything," I said. "I am just done hiding the smoke." What I sent was not dramatic. There were no accusations, no speeches. I forwarded copies of invoices with mismatched totals, emails that contradicted filed reports, documents that had been labeled temporary and then used permanently. I did not decide guilt. I did not ask for punishment. I gave facts to the places that handle facts. That was all. Enough to make partners pause. Enough to make the bank request explanations. Enough to raise a flag that would require answers Benjamin had never prepared. This was not a raid. It was an audit of reality. Claire called that afternoon. Her voice was already broken before she said hello. "What did you do?" she demanded, panic cutting through her anger. "Do you want me to die? Are you jealous because I have a family and you do not?" The words hurt. Not because they were sharp, but because they were familiar. I had carried that accusation for years without hearing it spoken. "I am not jealous," I said, my voice steady even as my chest ached. "I just refuse to be kicked aside like garbage." There was a pause, heavy and stunned. "You could have ruined us," she whispered. "I protected you for years," I answered. "You never noticed." "I'm resto." After the call ended, I sat alone and let the weight of it settle. I did not feel righteous. I felt tired. There is a loneliness that comes with choosing truth after a lifetime of silence, because silence, for all its damage, keeps you company. I wondered how many times I had convinced myself that being ignored was the same as being at peace. I wondered when I had taught my daughter that my presence was something to be managed instead of honored. These questions did not undo what I had done, but they explained why it had taken so long. The consequences did not arrive with sirens. They arrived as requests, as meetings postponed, as phone calls that no longer returned smiles. Partners asked Benjamin for clarification. The bank asked for documentation. The tax office opened a review. Each step followed another with the patience of procedure. I was not at the center of it. I was simply no longer standing in the way. When Claire came by later that evening, her eyes swollen, she did not apologize. She asked if there was any way to stop it. I told her the truth again. "I cannot stop what I did not start," I said. "I only stopped pretending it was not there." End quote. That night, as I lay down, I understood something I had resisted my entire adult life. Love does not require you to erase yourself to prove it is real. Protection that costs you your dignity is not protection at all. I had stayed quiet because I loved my daughter. I had finally spoken because I loved myself enough to matter. Dinner was set as if nothing were wrong, as if the house had not shifted under its own weight in the last 24 hours. When I walked in, Evelyn was already seated in my chair, the one I had used for years because it faced the window and kept my back from aching. She adjusted herself deliberately, smoothing the napkin on her lap, and did not look up when I paused. That small choice was not accidental. It was a claim. Claire hovered near the counter, arranging glasses she did not need to arrange, her eyes flicking toward me and then away. Benjamin stood at the head of the table, tapping his phone with the confidence of a man who believes posture can replace stability. Claire cleared her throat and finally spoke, her voice pitched higher than usual. "Mom," she said, "can you say something to Evelyn and Richard? Just to smooth things over." I asked what she meant, though I already knew. She lowered her eyes. "An apology," she said, "for the stress, for everything." Benjamin looked up then, impatience flashing across his face. "Just apologize," he said. "You are making my family look bad." At that moment, I understood they did not want peace. They wanted proof that I would kneel. The words landed hard, not because they were new, but because they were spoken out loud, in front of everyone, without shame. Evelyn lifted her chin and examined me with the polite interest one gives a stain that will not come out. "We have heard about you," she said. "An older woman who lives off her daughter. It is not how we do things." Her tone was measured, cultured, the cruelty wrapped neatly so it could pass as observation. Richard nodded, as if this were a reasonable assessment, as if years of shared walls and shared meals had never existed. Claire did not contradict them. She stared at the table, her silence louder than agreement. Benjamin leaned closer, lowering his voice the way people do when they want compliance, not conversation. "Say it," he said. "This ends if you just say it." I felt something tighten behind my ribs. Not fear, but recognition. This was what they wanted from me. Not understanding, not repair, but submission. An apology would not fix anything. It would simply confirm the story they had already written, that I was the problem and always had been. I looked toward Noah, sitting at the end of the table with his feet swinging, watching the adults with wide, uncertain eyes. He reached for my hand under the table and whispered, "Grandma, do not cry." I had not realized tears were gathering until that moment. I squeezed his fingers once, gently, and let go. I did not want him to learn that love meant watching someone shrink. Evelyn continued, her voice smooth and relentless. "We value independence," she said. "We value dignity. It is embarrassing when boundaries are not understood." The word boundaries echoed in my head, bitter and ironic. Boundaries had never been the issue. Control had. My presence reminded them of debts they preferred to forget, of numbers that did not lie, of a woman who had watched the foundation being poured and knew exactly where the cracks would show. That was why they hated me. Not because I was old or inconvenient, but because I was a witness. Claire finally looked up at me, desperation flickering across her face. "Please," she said. "Just this once." In her eyes I saw a child again, the girl who had wanted to fit in, who had learned early that survival sometimes meant choosing the side with the louder voice. I loved her. That had never changed. But love that demanded my erasure was no longer something I could give. I pushed my chair back and stood. The room went quiet, not with shock, but with anticipation. They expected resistance to sound like pleading. They expected me to soften. Instead, I felt a calm settle over me, the kind that comes when you stop negotiating with a lie. "I am not apologizing," I said. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I do not live off anyone." Evelyn's mouth tightened, ready to interrupt, but I continued. "I am the reason this house stayed upright when there was no money and no plan. I am the one who kept the lights on and the numbers straight so others could stand tall." End quote. Benjamin scoffed, but there was uncertainty in it now. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. I looked at her, really looked, and saw how much of herself she had given away trying to become someone else. "You think I am a burden because you are tired of remembering where you came from," I said quietly. "That is not my shame to carry. Whatever point now." Evelyn stood then, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You are being dramatic," she said. "This is not your house." I met her gaze without flinching. "It is the house I held together," I replied, "and I will not kneel in it." The word hung in the air, heavy and final. No one spoke. Even Benjamin seemed unsure what to say next. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair and turned toward the door. Noah stood and ran to me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "I love you," he said into my sweater. I kissed the top of his head and whispered that I loved him too, that I always would. Then I straightened and walked out, my back steady, my steps unhurried. Behind me, the house remained full of people who believed power came from forcing others to bend. Ahead of me was a quieter space, one where I no longer had to prove my worth by enduring humiliation. I had not apologized. I had not bowed, and for the first time in years, I did not feel small walking away. The collapse did not announce itself with shouting or flashing lights. It moved the way truth usually does, quietly and then all at once. A partner Benjamin had relied on for years called to say the contract would not be renewed, citing risk and uncertainty, words that sound polite until they drain a room of oxygen. Another partner followed, then another, each decision small on its own, together a pattern no one could ignore. The company that once bragged about momentum began missing beats. Projects paused. Calls went unanswered. By the end of the week, employees started asking questions Benjamin could not answer. Paychecks arrived late, then later. One foreman stopped by the house and waited on the porch, hat in his hands, asking when things would be resolved. Benjamin told him soon, always soon, but the word lost its meaning when nothing followed it. Men who had trusted him with their labor began to trust him less with their patience. Fear spreads faster than confidence ever did. The bank asked for documentation again, not because they wanted to be cruel, but because discrepancies invite scrutiny. Files were requested, statements compared, totals checked against dates. The gaps I had noticed years ago did not close under examination, they widened. A notice arrived requesting clarification within a set time frame, formal language that carried weight even when read silently. Soon after, another envelope followed, this one informing Benjamin that an audit had been opened. No accusations, just process. the kind that does not care who you think you are. Evelyn and Richard stopped offering opinions and started asking questions. Benjamin, Evelyn said one evening, her voice sharp with worry rather than judgment. What kind of business are you running? Richard paced, his earlier confidence replaced by irritation at being exposed to instability. The same people who had dismissed me as an embarrassment now feared becoming one themselves. Respect built on appearances does not survive inspection. I did not attend meetings or read every update. I heard enough through Claire, who called more often now, her voice stripped of rehearsed certainty. She told me about partners pulling out, about employees quitting, about the bank demanding explanations Benjamin struggled to assemble. She did not ask me to fix it. She asked me how to breathe. I listened, because I could, but I did not step in. Stepping in had been my habit. It had nearly erased me. Claire reached her lowest point quietly. There was no dramatic apology, no confession that would have made this easier to forgive. There was only exhaustion. She came to me one afternoon and sat on the edge of the chair, the way she used to when she was young and unsure. I thought if I chose the right life, the right people, everything would finally be okay, she said. I thought you were holding me back. The admission did not wound me the way it once would have. It clarified something instead. She had chosen status over substance, image over integrity, and the reward for that choice was a room full of people who vanished when the image cracked. Benjamin avoided me. When we crossed paths, his eyes slid away, no anger left in them, only calculation and fatigue. He did not curse me, he did not accuse me. In some ways, that was worse for him. Anger allows blame. What remained was accountability, and it had nowhere to go. The official letters continued, each one precise and restrained. A request for records, a timeline for review, an appointment scheduled, then rescheduled, no handcuffs, no spectacle, just a narrowing of options. I recognized the rhythm. Systems do not collapse because someone points at them. They collapse because they were already unsound, because shortcuts compound, because pretending becomes policy. Evelyn stopped calling me names. She stopped calling at all. Richard left a voicemail once, stiff and formal, asking if I would consider explaining a few things. I did not return it. Explanation had been my currency for years, spent freely and without return. I was no longer obligated to translate reality for people who had dismissed it when it did not suit them. Claire watched all of this and understood, finally, what she had traded away. She had believed dignity came from proximity to power. She learned instead that dignity comes from standing where you can tell the truth and still sleep at night. No one at the table she had chosen respected her when things went wrong. They looked past her, over her, through her. I had warned her once, long ago, that respect borrowed is respect withdrawn at the first sign of trouble. She had laughed then. She did not laugh now. As the days passed, the house felt different, heavier, not with guilt but with consequence. I did not celebrate. I did not mourn. I observed. What fell did so because it was built on uneven ground. I had not pushed. I had simply stopped being the brace that kept it from tipping. Braces are blamed when buildings fall. No one thanks them for holding the weight. And when it finally leaned into its own weight, it revealed what had always been true. They did not fall because of me. They fell because of themselves. Claire came to Darlene's house just after sunset, her face bare of makeup, her shoulders folded inward like she was trying to take up less space in the world. I was sitting at the small kitchen table, with a cup of tea I had reheated twice without drinking when she knocked. When I opened the door, she broke before I could speak. "Mom," she said, and then the rest of the sentence dissolved into tears. She stepped inside and held her arms around herself, shaking. "I was wrong," she said finally. "I am so sorry." I waited. I had learned that silence can be a mirror, and I wanted to see what she would find in it. She wiped her face and tried again. "Everything fell apart," she said. I did not know who to trust anymore. I nodded once, not in agreement, but in recognition. "Are you sorry because you are afraid of losing your husband?" I asked quietly. "Or because you are afraid of losing your house?" The question landed between us like a held breath. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes dropped to the floor. She did not answer. That was answer enough. I did not yell. I did not list grievances. I told her what I had already done and what I would not undo. I told her the guarantee was gone, permanently. I told her I would not step back into a role where my worth depended on how useful I was to someone else's comfort. I am not punishing you, I said. I am choosing myself. She nodded slowly, absorbing words she had never expected to hear from me. She asked if there was anything she could do. I told her there was. Tell the truth, I said, to yourself first. I told her I loved her, because that was true. But I also told her love did not mean surrender. It did not mean shrinking so someone else could feel tall. She cried harder then, the kind of crying that comes when defenses finally fail. I let her cry. Comfort offered too quickly can become another form of escape. We talked about Noah. Her voice softened when she said his name, and so did mine. I told her I had set aside a trust in his name, modest but real, something that would be there when he needed it for school or a start in life. It is for him, I said. Not for you to borrow against, not to patch holes, for him. Claire nodded, understanding the boundary even as it stung. I kissed her forehead before she left, a gesture that surprised us both. Love, when it is honest, does not disappear. It changes shape. After she was gone, I sat back down at the table and finished my tea. Outside, the street was quiet, ordinary, unchanged by the decisions that had altered my life. That quiet felt earned. I had not won anything in the way people imagine winning. There were no trophies, no apologies that erased the past. There was only clarity, and with it, peace. I had stepped out of a cycle that taught women to confuse endurance with virtue. I moved into a small apartment a week later, sunlight in the mornings and no history in the walls. I chose what stayed and what went. I chose when to speak and when to rest. I answered calls when I wanted to. I did not answer when I did not. The world did not collapse because I set limits. It was adjusted. I used to believe that being a good mother meant suffering quietly, that love was proven by how much you could take without breaking. I know better now. Being a mother also means teaching your children where they are allowed to stand and where they are not allowed to push you. There are people who do not get to throw you out of your own life, even if they share your blood. I did not seek revenge. I returned the truth to where it belonged, and in doing so, I gave myself something I had postponed for too long. I did not win by taking something from them. I won by taking myself back. A life that was finally my own. Before I go, I want to leave you with this. I did not tell my story for pity. I told it so the truth would stop sitting alone in the dark. Too many women learn to stay quiet, to endure, to believe love means disappearing piece by piece. It does not. Silence can be strength, but only when it is chosen, not forced. If my story sounded familiar, if it stirred something you have carried quietly for years, know this. You are not weak for surviving, and you are not cruel for finally choosing yourself. Time does not erase dignity. Age does not cancel truth. And justice does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives calmly, with paperwork, boundaries, and a steady voice that says, enough. This is Grandma True Stories, a place where the quietest woman in the room finally speaks, and the world listens. If you believe stories like this matter, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these voices alive, reaching the hearts that need them most. Thank you for sitting with me. Thank you for listening. And remember, wisdom does not shout, it remembers.